was the scene as protesters clashed with police, just blocks away from the NATO summit.
When I got a fucking phone over here, I'm gonna punch one of the fucking shitheads in the face, bro. What was that for? Fucking piece of shit cop. Yeah, you got fucking billy clubs. For no fucking reason.
Many protesters, like this one, were injured by the police. However, the police in large part appeared to be responding to violent protesters, who repeatedly threw projectiles at officers. Chief among these protesters intent on causing trouble were Black Bloc Anarchists, who earlier in the day attacked members of the press, throwing an unknown liquid at them in attempts to destroy their cameras. All of this was in stark contrast to a few hours earlier in the day, when the protest was peaceful, even family-friendly, as thousands gathered in Grant Park for a permitted march to McCormick Place, where the summit was being held.
Well, it reminds me of the anti-imperialist, anti-war marches of the 1960s, during the Democratic Convention, for example, where people came from all over the country to oppose the war in Vietnam. So I'm happy to see that so many people coming together again around the same issue.
We are Vietnam Veterans Against the War. The return of the medals to NATO by Iraq Veterans Against the War is the completion of a circle we started 41 years ago down in Washington, D.C. by doing the very same thing at the Capitol. We returned our medals, they're returning theirs.
All I have to say is that this is not something that I'm proud of.
As soldiers threw their medals back, and protesters marched by the Chicago Hilton, the site of a police riot against protesters at the 1968 Democratic Convention, the protest felt very much like a blast from the past. 60s radical Bill Ayers was even there, as a march leader.
I'm still living, still one foot in front of the other, still fighting the man, still working for peace and justice. It's a thrill. NATO is a military dictatorship. You know, we live in a country where civilian control of the military is a principle. Who is the civilian control over NATO? There is none. So NATO is a military dictatorship. Every country that's a member of NATO has a popular movement among its population saying, get my country out of NATO. We have to have that here. US out of NATO, disband NATO. NATO spends 3/4 of the military budget in the world is NATO's. NATO is a tool to bypass the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's a tool to bypass CIA rendition and torture. So NATO needs to be abolished. And all of this kind of idea that NATO's coming to Chicago, just like the Shriners or the Auto Show, is nonsense. It's a group of warmongers who have a permanent policy of invasion, preemptive war, and permanent war. We need to oppose that if we want a future.
And that was the message that the thousands of people who came out all agreed upon. However, a small group of black-clad anarchists had some different opinions.
I'm an anarchist, so I'm against capitalism and the state entirely. I want an entirely new society. NATO, the government, these police, they're straight up fucking terrorists. Like, they've fucked with people, they've arrested people, they've beaten people, they've done all kinds of fucked up shit.
Skirmishes like these erupted from time to time between Black Bloc protesters and the police. During this one, I filmed from behind the cops, thinking that I'd be safe there. However, that wasn't the case, as a wooden projectile intended for the police hit me in the chest. Despite having projectiles thrown at them, the police seemed to exercise an incredible degree of restraint. Here, when an officer attempted to arrest a suspected agitator, and protesters gathered to protect him from arrest, the officer walked away, avoiding a violent confrontation. What the protesters didn't know is that suspects like these were reported to Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy, who issued orders for their arrests.
The target right there in the blue.
Here, an officer identifies a reported agitator wearing a blue shirt leaving the crowd. Before the suspect even knows it, the police swoop in and arrest him, preventing a violent confrontation.
Here, guys. Back, guys. Back.
I asked the suspect why he had been targeted out.
The officers singled you out. What were you doing there? They singled you out? I have no idea. I just got pulled.
As things calmed down, the cops loaded about 50 protesters into police vans. This whole situation started at the end of the permitted march. Police issued warnings for the crowd to disperse to the west when the permit expired.
This is the Chicago Police Department. You must disperse to the west.
However, a number of protesters chanting NATO is east refused to leave, and after an attempt by Black Bloc Anarchists to push through the police line, the police started to clear the intersection by force.
We were standing up front. Police were telling people to move back. We were wedged in between a wall and a pole. We couldn't move back. One of the officers, at least, there's only one I could tell, just started hitting people, hit somebody straight up with a baton, wooden baton on the head, cracked their skull open.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Ingram in for Bill O'Reilly tonight. Thanks for watching us. Let's get right to the top story, anarchy in Chicago.
This Occupy Wall Street movement is now very coordinated, and they are terrorists. They are trying to create trouble. That's what terrorists do.
It almost goes without saying that the right-wing media had a field day with the violence from the protests. They attempted to connect the entire Occupy movement with a small group of anarchists intent on causing trouble.
When big summits happen, a lot of shit goes down and things can get dangerous, so I understand some of the fear and like the put-offs. Then there's also the conservatives who are just like, they don't agree with it at all. But overall, I found like most people here are sympathetic at least. Like if they don't want revolution, they want reform.
All of this made me think back to when the movement was focused on connecting with most people, the 99%. I was there on the first day of Occupy Wall Street, when the movement was full of energy and excitement.
How about that we are going to create the beginning of a new America on this day, that we are going to start a real revolution here.
Movements being destroyed by differences of tactics is nothing new. During the 1960s, Students for a Democratic Society split over a faction led by Bill Ayers that advocated smashing windows and bombing buildings called the Weather Underground. We cannot let a group of anarchists intent on causing trouble destroy the Occupy movement.